11:47 p.m. November rain carved silver streaks down Marcus Reed's face as he turned the final lock at Millbrook Supermarket. The bolt clicked home with the finality of a cell door. Third double shift this week. Muscles screaming protests he'd learned to ignore. 42 years on this earth had taught him that pain was just another bill to pay, and his body kept excellent credit. The parking lot stretched into darkness, broken streetlight flickering its death rattle overhead like a neon sign for desperation. $67 in his wallet. He'd counted it twice during his dinner break, fingers tracing the worn bills like prayer beads. Payday was Friday, 4 days that might as well be 4 years when your daughter's asthma medication cost $340 and the pharmacy didn't accept promises or apologies. Maya's inhaler was down to its last few puffs, the kind of math that kept fathers awake at night, staring at water-stained ceilings. The rain intensified, November's way of reminding Connecticut it owned you. Marcus pulled his security jacket tighter, polyester so thin it might as well have been tissue paper. Millbrook logo patched 3 times across the chest because buying a new one meant choosing between warmth and groceries. His Honda Civic waited in the employee section, rust claiming the wheel wells like a slow-motion cancer. Passenger window held together by duct tape and stubborn pride. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to rain or wind or the normal symphony of an empty parking lot at midnight. Soft, desperate, human. A sob that carried the weight of the world breaking. Marcus froze, every instinct from 20 years of security work firing at once. His hand went to the mag light on his belt, not much of a weapon, but it was what he had. The sound came again, closer now, and he followed it to the rust-stained dumpster behind the loading dock. She was crumpled against the metal container like discarded trash, but everything about her screamed wrong for this setting. Midnight blue silk dress clinging to trembling skin, soaked through and ruined. Christian Louboutin heels. Marcus knew the brand because Claire had pointed them out in magazines she'd never buy from. $1,200 sinking into murky puddles. Perfectly manicured hands pressed against her mouth to stifle sobs that shook her entire body. But her eyes. God, her eyes held the kind of terror that money couldn't buy and power couldn't protect against. Primal fear, the hunted kind, the kind Marcus had seen in Claire's face when the oncologist said stage 4. He approached slowly, the way his grandfather had taught him to approach injured animals back in rural Georgia. Hands visible, movements deliberate, voice low and calm even when your heart was racing. She flinched at his shadow, pressing herself harder against the dumpster as if trying to disappear into the metal. Mascara had carved black rivers down alabaster cheeks. A bruise was forming along her jawline, fresh enough that the edges still held the imprint of fingers. Marcus peeled off his worn security jacket without thinking, muscle memory from years of fatherhood overriding every practical objection his mind could raise. The jacket looked absurd against her obvious wealth, faded blue with the Millbrook logo practically transparent from washing. But she clutched it like a lifeline. Her voice came out fractured, each syllable fighting through chattering teeth. "Sir, please don't let them take me." The words hung in the rain-soaked air between them. Marcus's pulse quickened, mouth suddenly dry. A protective instinct rose in him that had nothing to do with his security badge and everything to do with the father who'd spent years raising a daughter alone, who understood what it meant to be vulnerable in a world that didn't care. "Who's after you?" His fingers tightened around the maglight, scanning the shadows where darkness pooled like spilled ink beneath the broken lights. The parking lot held secrets in every corner, places where bad things could hide and wait. She shook her head frantically, dark hair plastering against pale cheeks. "I can't." A violent shudder ran through her body, teeth chattering so hard he could hear them click. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." In that moment, neither of them knew that a forgotten night shift security guard was about to become the most dangerous man in America, that this rain-soaked meeting behind a discount supermarket would unravel secrets worth killing for, conspiracies that stretched back 27 years, and technology so dangerous It had already claimed lives. Marcus knelt beside her, rain soaking through his cheap uniform shirt, plastering the polyester to his skin. She couldn't be more than 38, but exhaustion had carved years into her face. Her clothes screamed wealth, the kind that came with corner offices and private jets and decisions that moved markets. Yet here she sat in a puddle behind a supermarket that sold day-old bread at discount, shaking like a lost child. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" His voice carried the gentle authority of someone who'd spent years calming a daughter's midnight fears, who knew the difference between pushing for answers and offering safety. She touched her jaw tentatively, wincing. "It's nothing." The lie sat heavy between them, obvious and desperate. "My car won't start. I don't have anywhere else to go." Her eyes darted toward the street, scanning for threats that seemed to lurk in every shadow. Marcus had learned during Claire's long illness not to press when people weren't ready to share their truth. Pain had its own timeline, grief its own language, and fear its own reasons for silence. He helped her to her feet, noting how she moved with unconscious grace despite her terror. Like a dancer who couldn't forget her training, even in crisis, muscle memory stronger than panic. The parking lot offered no shelter, and his beat-up Honda waited like a faithful old dog that knew it wasn't much, but showed up anyway. "I can give you a ride somewhere, or call someone for you." Her fingers suddenly gripped his forearm with surprising strength, pulse visibly racing in the delicate hollow of her throat. "No calls, please." Her eyes widened with panic that went beyond simple fear into something deeper, more visceral. "No police. No phones. Please." Her desperation reminded him of Maya during thunderstorms, that same raw need for safety without questions, that bone-deep fear that reason couldn't touch. Something in Marcus's calm acceptance made her shoulders drop slightly, the first sign that her guard was lowering. A single tear escaped, quickly wiped away with the back of a hand that bore a faint tan line where an expensive watch or bracelet had recently been. "Okay. No calls." The simple words seemed to matter more than any elaborate promise could have. Trust built in increments, in moments when you chose to believe someone despite every reason not to. The drive to his apartment building passed in careful silence, broken only by windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Marcus stole glances at his unexpected passenger, watching her study the modest neighborhood through rain-streaked windows. Millbrook wasn't much. Working-class families, small gardens protected by chain-link fences, porches with sagging steps but bright welcome mats. The kind of place where people minded their own business but brought casseroles when ambulances came. Where everyone knew your name but pretended not to notice when you were 3 months behind on rent. She seemed to drink in the normalcy like medicine, her breathing gradually slowing as they drove farther from the supermarket. When he parked beside Mrs. Patterson's house, with its riot of plastic flamingos that somehow looked dignified in the elderly woman's care, the stranger turned to him with something approaching wonder. "You live here?" Not condescending, just curious, as if she'd discovered a hidden world, a snow globe of ordinary life she'd only glimpsed through glass. "Third-floor apartment. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Marcus killed the engine, its familiar rattle settling into silence. He paused at the building's entrance, key hovering near the weather-beaten door that needed painting but wouldn't get it until the landlord finally noticed, or the wood rotted through. "I should mention I have a 9-year-old daughter, Maya. She's probably asleep, but just so you know." Maya wasn't asleep. She sat cross-legged on their second-hand couch in her favorite star-patterned pajamas, a science textbook open on her lap, like she was studying for college instead of 4th grade. Brown eyes widened with curiosity as Marcus entered with a stranger, taking in expensive clothes and trembling hands with the sharp observation only children possess. A half-empty mug of cocoa sat forgotten on the coffee table, marshmallow dissolving into a creamy island. "Dad, you're late! And wet!" Matter of fact, no judgment, just cataloging details like a tiny scientist. Then her gaze shifted to the woman behind him, and Marcus watched his daughter's face transform with the uncomplicated kindness she'd inherited from her mother. The best parts of Claire living on in this brilliant, beautiful girl who saw the world as puzzles waiting to be solved. "This is Kate. She needed a place to get out of the rain." He used the name the woman had whispered in the car when he'd finally asked what to call her, though something in the hesitation before she'd answered told him it might not be her real one. Maya's face lit up like someone had switched on stadium lights behind her eyes. "Hi, Kate. Do you want hot chocolate?" She bounced slightly on the couch, spilling a few drops of her own cocoa. "Dad makes the best kind with marshmallows that melt just right." He says the secret is a pinch of salt, but I think the secret is extra chocolate. Kate stared at the child as if she'd never seen one before, as if 9-year-old generosity was some exotic species she'd only read about in books. Then something cracked in her carefully controlled expression. Ice breaking on a frozen lake, fissures spreading faster than she could patch them. "I'd like that very much." Her voice caught on the simple kindness, threatening to break entirely, and Maya beamed as if she'd accomplished something significant, as if offering hot chocolate to a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Marcus watched this interaction while toweling his hair, struck by how naturally his daughter offered comfort to someone she didn't know. Claire had been the same way, heart open to anyone who needed shelter from life's storms, door always unlocked for friends and strangers alike. The thought brought its usual stab of loss, sharp and familiar like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed, but also something new. Pride. Maya was becoming her own person, carrying the best parts of her mother forward like a torch passed between generations. As Kate accepted a steaming mug with hands that still trembled slightly, Marcus caught her studying the modest living room with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. Family photos on the mantel chronicled Maya's growth and Claire's absence, a visual timeline of before and after, the dividing line drawn in hospital beds and funeral flowers. Maya's art projects taped to the refrigerator in a colorful collage, stick figures holding hands beneath crayon suns, a chess set missing 2 pawns on the coffee table, pieces worn from years of handling, from nights when Claire couldn't sleep and they'd played until dawn. The throw blanket crocheted by Marcus's grandmother, colors fading but still warm. The bookshelf overflowing with well-loved paperbacks, spines cracked from multiple readings. The plant struggling to survive on the windowsill despite Marcus's best efforts and Maya's stern lectures about proper watering schedules. Kate looked like an anthropologist discovering a lost civilization, eyes lingering on the small touches that made a house a home. What kind of life had she left behind, Marcus wondered, that simple human kindness seemed so foreign, so worthy of awe? 3 days passed before Kate spoke about anything beyond pleasantries. She'd been staying on their couch despite Marcus's offers to find her a motel room or contact family, claiming her purse had been stolen along with identification and credit cards, leaving her stranded. The story had more holes than Maya's favorite Swiss cheese, but Marcus didn't push. He'd learned during Claire's 18-month battle that sometimes people needed time to find words for their pain. Pressure only built walls higher, made secrets harder to share. Kate made herself useful in ways that revealed character more than words ever could. She cleaned while he worked, not with the awkward fumbling of someone unused to housework, but with methodical efficiency that spoke of discipline and training. She helped Maya with homework, explaining fractions with clever analogies that made the girl's eyes light up with understanding, comparing denominators to different-sized pizza slices, numerators to how many pieces you got to eat. She cooked dinners that revealed a sophistication his usual mac and cheese couldn't match, transforming their dwindling pantry supplies into meals that smelled like restaurants Claire used to watch on cooking shows, back when they could still dream about things like anniversary dinners and weekend getaways. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Marcus asked one evening as she transformed chicken thighs and whatever vegetables he'd grabbed on clearance into something that made his mouth water just from the smell. Her hand stilled momentarily over the cutting board, knife frozen mid-chop. "My mother believed everyone should know how to nourish themselves, even children with silver spoons." The phrasing struck him as odd, another puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture she was painting. He filed it away with the other observations, her perfect posture that never slouched even when exhausted, the way she automatically reached for a non-existent phone in moments of silence, how she startled at the neighbor's doorbell as if unexpected visitors were harbingers of doom. Kate moved through their small space with careful gratitude, making the couch bed each morning with hospital corners tight enough to bounce quarters, asking permission before using anything, as if afraid that too much comfort might make her unwelcome. Her designer clothes, now washed and hanging in Marcus's closet beside his 3 work shirts, were replaced by borrowed sweatpants and t-shirts that somehow looked elegant on her frame, as if you could dress wealth in rags and it would still show through in the way she held herself. Maya adored her immediately, with the uncomplicated acceptance children offer before life teaches them caution, before the world explains that strangers are dangerous and different is threatening. Kate listened to 9-year-old explanations of scientific theories with genuine interest, helped with art projects without taking over, and seemed endlessly patient with questions about everything from quantum physics to why boys were so weird. Girls are weird too. Seriously, everyone's weird in their own way, Kate told her one afternoon while they built an elaborate structure from Maya's blocks, creating what looked like a miniature particle accelerator according to Maya's detailed specifications. That's what makes humans interesting. Marcus would come home from his security shifts, muscles aching from standing 12 hours straight on concrete floors that showed no mercy, to find them building these structures, or Kate explaining the periodic table using kitchen spices, cinnamon for iron because of the reddish color, black pepper for carbon, salt for sodium. Chemistry lessons delivered through taste and smell, education that stuck because it engaged all the senses. "She's really smart, Dad," Maya confided one evening as they cleaned dishes, her small hands wrapped in yellow rubber gloves too big for her, looking like a scientist preparing for an experiment. "And sad. But she's getting less sad each day. I can tell because her eyes crinkle more when she smiles now. Before they stayed flat, even when her mouth moved." Out of the mouths of babes. Marcus had noticed the same thing, watching the transformation with a mix of relief and something more complicated that tightened his chest when he caught Kate humming while folding laundry, or found her asleep on the couch, finally peaceful instead of braced for attack. How her shoulders gradually unclenched from their perpetual defensive posture. How genuine smiles began replacing polite ones. How she laughed at Maya's jokes without that split-second delay of someone remembering how to be human. The first significant crack in Kate's careful facade came during a trip to Millbrook's farmers market. Maya had dragged them both to see the weekend vendors, chattering excitedly about the local beekeeper's honeycomb and the organic vegetables she wanted for a school project on sustainable farming. "I've never grown anything, not even a houseplant," Kate admitted as they wandered between stalls, inhaling the scent of fresh bread and late-season apples, watching vendors call out their wares with the practiced enthusiasm of people who loved what they did. "Dad kills plants too," Maya said cheerfully, skipping ahead to examine a display of winter squash that looked like alien spacecraft. "Mom was the one with the green thumb. She said plants need someone to talk to just like people." Kate nodded thoughtfully, something flickering across her face too quick to name. "My mother used to say plants respond to love. I always thought she was being sentimental, but apparently there's scientific evidence that plants respond to human voices, to consistent care and attention." She moved through the modest crowd like she was walking through a museum, studying faces with the fascination of someone who'd forgotten what ordinary looked like. The weathered lines of the apple farmer who'd been working this land for 40 years, the laugh-creased eyes of the bread seller who knew every customer's favorite loaf, the easy camaraderie between neighboring vendors who competed for sales but shared coffee and conversation between customers. Her gaze lingered on a young father carrying his toddler on shoulders, the child's hands tangled in his hair while she pointed at everything with the wonder only small children possess. Something like longing flashed across Kate's face before she looked away, jaw tight with an emotion Marcus recognized from his own mirror, the ache of wanting something you're not sure you deserve. At the flower vendor, she stopped abruptly, her entire body going still, like someone had pressed pause on a film. White blooms with layers of delicate petals caught her attention, drew her forward like a magnet. "Peonies." She breathed the word like a prayer, reaching toward the flowers with trembling fingers. "My mother grew these in our garden. She said they were the queens of the flower world, demanding but worth the effort. You had to stake them or the blooms would drag in the mud, had to protect them from late frost, had to cut them at exactly the right time. The vendor, a weathered man named Tom, with soil permanently embedded in his nail beds and kindness in his eyes, smiled broadly. "Beautiful choice, miss. These are local, grown right here in Connecticut soil. Best in the country for peonies. The cold winters help them bloom fuller." Kate's hand snapped back as if burned, color draining from her face like water from a broken glass. Connecticut. Her voice barely audible, something like panic replacing the nostalgia. "I didn't realize we were still in Connecticut." Marcus filed that detail away, noting how she suddenly seemed eager to leave, eyes darting around the market as if searching for hidden threats in every face, every shadow. She tugged the borrowed baseball cap lower over her face and suggested they return home, complaining of a headache that hadn't existed minutes before. That evening, as Maya worked on homework at the kitchen table, multiplication tables that she attacked with the same intensity she brought to everything, Marcus found Kate standing at their small kitchen window, staring at nothing. The setting sun caught gold highlights in her dark hair, and for the first time, he noticed how beautiful she was beneath the exhaustion and fear. Not magazine beautiful with its airbrushed perfection, but real, the kind of face that told stories if you knew how to read them. Strength in the set of her jaw, intelligence in the creases beside her eyes, sorrow in the downward turn of her mouth when she thought no one was watching. "You okay?" He kept his distance, giving space when questions helped and when silence served better. "I was just thinking about peonies." Funny how smells can transport you back to being 7 years old, picking flowers with your mother in a garden that doesn't exist anymore. Her voice carried weight, not just memory, but grief, the kind that had aged like wine into something you learned to carry. "She used to let me arrange them for the dining room table. Said I had an artist's eye, that I saw balance where others saw chaos." She ran her fingers along the window frame, tracing a crack in the paint that Marcus kept meaning to fix but never found time for. "Does it ever get easier? Losing someone who shaped your whole world?" The question caught him off guard with its naked vulnerability, stripping away pretense to reveal the wound beneath. "Claire loved flowers," Marcus offered after a moment, leaning against the counter, hands gripping the edge hard enough to feel the laminate bite into his palms. Our tiny balcony was packed with pots. The neighbors complained about water dripping down, but she just planted more trailing things as an apology, turned their annoyance into something beautiful. The memory made him smile, despite the familiar ache, because some pains were worth keeping. Maya still talks to them sometimes, tells them about her day. I hear her through the window when I'm making dinner, having full conversations with petunias about her science projects. Kate's face softened at the mention of Claire, the first time she'd seemed genuinely curious about Marcus's past, rather than carefully deflecting personal questions like a politician avoiding scandal. "Tell me about her. Your wife. If you want to, that is." They sat at the small kitchen table, Maya's multiplication worksheets providing gentle background noise, the scratch of pencil on paper, occasional sighs of frustration, the small sounds of childhood concentration. Marcus found himself sharing memories he'd kept locked away like treasured photographs too painful to view. Claire's laugh that started in her toes and erupted like a volcano, impossible to contain or predict. Her terrible cooking that somehow always tasted perfect because it was made with absolute conviction that if you loved something enough, the universe would cooperate. The way she'd dance while folding laundry, grabbing Maya for impromptu waltzes around the living room, singing off-key to 80s power ballads that she claimed were the soundtrack to true romance. How she'd faced her cancer diagnosis with fury rather than sadness, angry at missing Maya's future, not afraid of her own ending, raging against the dying of the light with every breath, fighting for one more day, one more hour, one more moment to watch their daughter grow. She sounds like she lived completely, no half measures. Kate twisted a paper napkin between her fingers, shredding it unconsciously into smaller and smaller pieces. Even at the end, when the pain was bad, she'd say these things that just stuck. Like she knew exactly how much she loved this life and wanted to make sure we knew it too. "At least I know exactly how much I love this life," Marcus quoted, throat tight with emotion that still ambushed him at unexpected moments. Some people never get that clarity, never understand what they have until it's gone. She knew, and she made sure we knew. Kate listened with absolute attention, asking gentle questions that showed she understood the difference between losing someone and having someone taken from you, between grief that aged like wine and grief that stayed raw and bleeding. Her own sorrow seemed to echo in the spaces between her words, in the way she held herself like someone carrying invisible weight. "She sounds extraordinary," Kate said when Marcus's stories wound down, the kitchen now dark except for the small light above the stove, casting shadows that made everything seem more intimate. "Maya has her eyes, and her spirit, I think. That curiosity, that lack of fear about asking hard questions." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. "Some days I look at Maya and see Claire so clearly it takes my breath away. That determined little chin when she's decided something. The way she tilts her head when she's thinking hard, like she's listening to something the rest of us can't hear." He paused, the confession harder than he expected. "Other days, I worry I'm not enough, that I can't give her what a mother would, that I'm missing things a woman would notice. The emotional stuff, the friend drama, the way the world treats girls differently than boys." Kate reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Her skin was soft, unmarked by manual labor, but her grip was strong, certain. "You're raising an incredible human being, Marcus. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you see her, really see her. Do you know how rare that is? To be truly seen?" The compliment hit differently coming from her, someone who clearly understood the weight of responsibility, even if he didn't know the details of her own burdens. In the days she'd been with them, Kate had watched him with Maya with an attention that felt like more than casual observation, like she was studying a language she'd forgotten how to speak, or learning something she'd never been taught. The evening Maya got sick marked the turning point in their careful dance around each other's secrets. It started with a fever that spiked suddenly after dinner, Maya's cheeks flushing crimson as she pushed away her plate of spaghetti, the budget-friendly kind that came in a box, but Maya never complained about. By bedtime, she was shivering violently, chills that had her teeth chattering despite Marcus's efforts to warm her with extra blankets, the quilts his grandmother had made layered 3 deep. Kate took one look at Maya's glazed eyes and went into crisis mode with an efficiency that spoke of experience, of training, of a life Marcus didn't understand. "We need to get her to a hospital, now." Her voice carried absolute authority, the first time he'd heard her speak with such command. And gone was the cautious houseguest, replaced by someone accustomed to making life-altering decisions without hesitation or doubt. Within minutes, she'd called a cab, breaking her own rule about no phones, which should have registered as significant, wrapped Maya in blankets, and was cradling the semi-conscious child while barking directions to the driver with the precision of someone who'd navigated crises before. Marcus sat beside them, heart hammering against his ribs, hard enough to hurt, watching Kate check Maya's pulse with practiced fingers against the girl's wrist, counting silently while her eyes tracked the second hand on her watch that had somehow appeared despite the story about everything being stolen. At Millbrook General, she moved through the emergency room like she owned it, back straight, voice clear and authoritative, as she approached the intake desk where a tired-looking nurse with frizzy gray hair was processing what looked like their 100th patient of the night. 9-year-old female, temperature 104.2, presenting with sudden onset fever, chills, and lethargy. Possible bacterial infection, need immediate assessment. She rattled off symptoms like a medical professional while Marcus stood frozen, parental fear momentarily paralyzing him in a way years of single fatherhood hadn't prepared him for. The triage nurse took one look at Kate's confident demeanor and immediately upgraded Maya's priority, leading them past patients who'd been waiting longer, through double doors into the treatment area where doctors actually worked instead of just triaged. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician with kind eyes and competent hands, treated Kate with a deference that seemed odd for someone whose only identification was a story about a lost purse. We'll start with a CBC and blood cultures. Given her symptoms, I'm concerned about possible sepsis, though let's not jump to worst-case scenarios yet. Kate nodded crisply, like she understood every word of medical jargon. I'd also suggest checking her urinary tract. She mentioned stomach pain yesterday that could indicate a kidney infection, and the fever spike is consistent with pyelonephritis. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Kate rattled off Maya's medical history with perfect accuracy. The ear infection last winter that had required 2 rounds of antibiotics, her mild allergy to penicillin that meant they always had to specify alternative medications, the fact that she hadn't had her tonsils removed despite recurring strep infections that Dr. Chen had suggested might warrant surgery, details he'd mentioned only in passing over their shared meals, conversations about childhood illnesses and medical bills that never seemed to end. Somehow Kate managed to get Maya admitted to a private room with a window view that Marcus knew their insurance wouldn't begin to cover, wouldn't even pretend to cover. A room with actual artwork on the walls, instead of the standard hospital prints of generic landscapes, with a door that closed for privacy instead of curtains that let every sound leak through. Don't worry about the cost, Kate said when Marcus finally found his voice and started to protest, started to explain that he had $67 and couldn't afford whatever this was going to cost. I'll handle it. She produced a platinum credit card from seemingly nowhere, the kind that didn't have limits and certainly didn't belong to someone stranded without identification. The kind that came with phone numbers for concierge services and airport lounges in cities Marcus had never visited. Marcus stared at the credit card in Kate's hand, noting the name embossed in elegant script. Catherine E. Hayes. Not Kate Miller, the name she'd given him with that slight hesitation that he'd ignored because he'd wanted to believe her, wanted to help, wanted to be the good guy in someone's story. Catherine Hayes. A name that sounded vaguely familiar in a way that made his stomach clench with unease, with the sick feeling that comes when you realize you've been lied to by someone you'd started to trust. While Kate, Catherine, spoke with doctors about Maya's condition using medical knowledge no ordinary person possessed, discussing white blood cell counts and antibiotic protocols like she'd gone to medical school, Marcus stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. His hands shook slightly as he typed the name into Google, watching the screen load with the slow inevitability of fate catching up. CEO of Hayes Industries. Forbes' list of most powerful women in America, number 73 with an arrow pointing up. Net worth, $2.3 billion. A number so large it stopped meaning anything, just became abstract zeros on a screen. Recent headlines about her mysterious disappearance from a board meeting 6 weeks ago. Corporate lawyers searching for their missing executive like she was a fugitive instead of their boss. Stock prices plummeting 22% in her absence. Rumors of mental breakdown, speculation about corporate espionage, theories about everything from amnesia to witness protection. The woman caring for his daughter in the hospital room wasn't Kate Miller, struggling stranger who needed help. She was Catherine Hayes, one of the most powerful people in the country, a woman whose face had graced magazine covers, who controlled a corporate empire employing 50,000 people, whose decisions affected global markets and retirement funds, and lives Marcus would never touch. He walked back into Maya's room on unsteady legs, seeing Kate, Catherine, with completely different eyes. The expensive clothes she'd arrived in made sense now, the casual way she'd handled the hospital fees, her knowledge of medical procedures and corporate efficiency, her perfect posture and articulate speech that no amount of borrowed sweatpants could disguise. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity, puzzle pieces forming a picture he should have seen days ago. This woman who'd been living in his home, eating at his table, reading bedtime stories to his daughter, had been lying about everything. Not just her name, but her entire identity, her entire life. His chest constricted with something between anger and betrayal, with the familiar helpless fury of being played for a fool because you wanted to believe in human kindness. Had it all been an act? The vulnerability, the growing friendship, the connection he'd felt forming between them like frost patterns on winter windows. When she looked up from Maya's bedside, genuine worry creasing her features as she stroked the sleeping child's hair with a tenderness that seemed real, Marcus felt the foundation of trust they'd built cracking beneath him like spring ice over a thawing lake. "We need to talk. Outside." His voice came out tight with controlled emotion, and her face shifted, understanding flickering in her eyes like she'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it. The hospital corridor stretched empty at 2 a.m, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows that made everyone look sick, guilty, exposed. Catherine stood with her back against the wall, shoulders squared, chin lifted, and for the first time since he'd found her in the rain, she looked like the powerful executive she actually was. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. A shift in posture, a hardening around the eyes, the mask of vulnerability falling away to reveal steel beneath. "You know," she said it simply, not a question, and there was relief in her voice despite everything, like keeping the secret had been a physical weight she was glad to set down. Marcus held up his phone, showing her own corporate headshot from Hayes Industries' website. Catherine in a tailored navy suit, hair swept into an elegant knot, expression confident and uncompromising. So different from the woman who'd been teaching Maya to make paper airplanes yesterday afternoon, laughing when they crashed into the ceiling fan. Catherine Elizabeth Hayes, CEO. Missing for 6 weeks. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears, echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Who are you really? And what are you doing with my family?" Catherine closed her eyes briefly, fluorescent lights emphasizing the dark circles beneath them that wealth couldn't erase and power couldn't hide. When she opened them again, the vulnerability was back, but tempered now with something that looked like relief, as if keeping the secret had been bleeding her dry and the wound could finally close. "My name is Catherine Hayes, and I'm exactly who those articles say I am. I built Hayes Industries from my father's small manufacturing company into a Fortune 500 corporation." Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, to quarterly reports and shareholder meetings where every word mattered. "We make medical equipment, specialized electronics, components for hospitals and research facilities, 50,000 employees across 12 states, operations that touch millions of lives." She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, self-protection rather than defiance. "6 weeks ago, I walked out of a meeting where my own board of directors was planning to dismantle key divisions, sell off proprietary technology, eliminate thousands of American jobs to pad their quarterly profits. When I refused to sign off on the deal, they began questioning my mental state, suggesting I was suffering from exhaustion and poor judgment. The words came faster now, released from a dam she'd held closed for weeks. I realized they were building a case to have me declared unfit, to force me out and install someone more cooperative, someone who wouldn't ask questions about offshore accounts and technology transfers that violated every principle my father built this company on. Marcus leaned against the opposite wall, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling him. Conspiracy that sounded like something from thriller movies rather than real life. Corporate intrigue on a scale that made his security guard problems seem microscopic. "So you ran away." Catherine laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty corridor like breaking glass. "I prefer to think of it as strategic withdrawal. I needed time to gather evidence of their conspiracy, to build a legal case before they could destroy me professionally and personally, before they could take everything my father spent 40 years building and turn it into quarterly bonuses for executives who never worked a real day in their lives." She gestured toward Maya's room, toward the sleeping child hooked to monitors that beeped steady reassurance. "I never intended to involve anyone else. I was supposed to lie low, maybe stay at a small hotel under a false name until I could meet with federal investigators. But then my rental car broke down in that parking lot." Her voice softened, losing its corporate edge. "And you offered me your jacket, like it was the most natural thing in the world." When was the last time someone showed me kindness without wanting something in return, without calculating the value of the gesture against potential benefit? "Everything you told us was a lie." Marcus's words came out harsher than he'd intended, but the betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharp and hot behind his sternum. He'd begun to trust her, to let her into the carefully protected world he'd built for Maya after Claire's death, to imagine possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her, color draining from her face like water circling a drain. Not everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the hospital's ambient noise, distant beeping, hushed conversations, the mechanical hum of life-saving equipment. Kate Miller might not be my real name, but the person you've gotten to know, she's more real than I've been in 15 years. The woman who helps Maya with science projects and burns toast and talks to you about books and loss and what it means to keep living after someone you love dies. That's who I am when no one's watching, when I don't have to be Catherine Hayes, CEO, when I can just be human. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, close enough to smell the hospital antiseptic clinging to her borrowed clothes. Marcus, I never meant for this to happen. I was supposed to stay a few days and disappear, leave before anyone got attached or invested or hurt. But Maya makes me laugh like I haven't in years. Really laugh until my stomach hurts and I forget to be careful. And you... Her voice broke slightly, emotion cracking through corporate composure. You make me remember what it feels like to be valued for who I am. Not what I can do for someone's profit margins. Not what connections I bring or deals I can broker. You looked at a stranger in the rain and saw someone who needed help. Not an opportunity or a liability or a strategic asset. How do I know it's real? The question hung between them like a challenge, like a plea. His hands clenched at his sides to stop their trembling. You have billions of dollars. You could buy this entire town, this hospital, probably half of Connecticut. What am I to you? Some kind of anthropological experiment? Rich woman slumming with the working class to remember what authentic feels like? Catherine's face crumpled at his words, and for a moment she looked as broken as the night he'd found her crouched by the dumpster, all pretense and composure washed away by genuine pain. You're the first person in 20 years who's asked me what I want, instead of telling me what I need to do. You're the man who gave his coat to a stranger without asking questions, who works multiple jobs to give his daughter every opportunity, who talks about his late wife like she was a gift from heaven, even though losing her nearly destroyed you. She took a shaky breath. You're the father who notices when Maya's quiet and knows exactly what stories make her laugh, who checks her homework, not to criticize, but to understand how she thinks. You're everything I never thought I deserved, everything I thought only existed in movies about normal people living normal lives. Before Marcus could respond, before he could sort through the tangle of emotions her confession created, Maya's voice called weakly from the hospital room. Dad? Kate? Where are you? They both turned toward the sound, and Marcus saw something in Catherine's face that looked like panic, not for herself, but for the child calling her name, for the connection she'd built with a 9-year-old who didn't care about billions or board meetings or corporate empires. What does this mean for Maya? Catherine asked quietly, vulnerability naked in her expression, all masks stripped away. She's gotten attached. She calls me her bonus mom sometimes when she thinks I can't hear, when she's explaining to her stuffed animals how families can have more people than just the ones you're born with. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, oxygen leaving his lungs in a rush that left him dizzy. Maya, who'd lost her mother so young, who still sometimes cried at night for Claire, had been allowing herself to love Catherine, to imagine a future with someone new in their small family. And now they were facing another loss, another person torn away from their lives, another hole to patch over with pretending everything was fine. I don't know. I honestly don't know. They returned to Maya's room to find her sitting up in bed, fever broken, but eyes bright with worry that no 9-year-old should have to carry. An IV dripped antibiotics into her arm, medical monitors casting blue glow across her pale face. But she'd always been more observant than most adults gave her credit for. Are you fighting? You both look sad. Direct as always. No dancing around uncomfortable truths. cutting straight to the emotional core the way children do before society teaches them to lie politely. Catherine sat on the edge of the hospital bed, taking Maya's small hand in hers, thumb tracing gentle circles on the child's palm. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. It just means we have to figure out how to be honest about who we are and what we need. Maya studied Catherine's face with 9-year-old wisdom that sometimes startled Marcus with its clarity, with how much she understood despite her age. Are you going to leave us? Like Mom did? The question came out small and scared, and Catherine's composure finally broke completely. A single tear slid down her cheek as she shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. I might have to go away for a while. There are people looking for me, and I don't want to bring trouble to your family. Don't want the bad things in my life to touch you and your dad. Maya's face fell, her lower lip trembling in the way that always broke Marcus's heart, that reminded him of Claire in her final days, asking if Maya would remember her. But you're part of our family now. You teach me science and make Dad smile again, and you don't treat me like I'm just a kid who doesn't understand things. Catherine pulled Maya into a careful hug, mindful of the IV and monitors, and Marcus watched his daughter's fingers tighten in Catherine's shirt, the same borrowed t-shirt she'd been wearing for 3 days because they were all she had. Because despite billions in net worth, she'd been living in his apartment, wearing his clothes and sleeping on his couch. The door opened and Nurse Jennings entered, the same woman who had cared for Claire during her final weeks, with a gentleness Marcus still remembered in dreams that woke him crying. Her familiar face sent a jolt of recognition through his body, memories flooding back unbidden. 3 a.m. morphine doses, quiet conversations about pain management, the way she'd held Claire's hand during the worst moments, and never flinched from the reality of death. Mr. Reed, I didn't realize. She froze when she saw Catherine, recognition flooding her features, followed by confusion as she looked between Marcus and the woman the business news called a missing CEO. Miss Hayes? I'm sorry, I didn't expect to see you here. Is everything… Her professional composure cracked slightly, uncertainty replacing the usual confident efficiency. Catherine's spine stiffened, her public mask sliding into place with practiced ease, even though she was still wearing borrowed sweatpants and a faded Millbrook High School t-shirt. You recognize me? Nurse Jennings nodded, confusion evident on her weathered face as she glanced between Marcus and Catherine like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. Of course. How could I forget? Your foundation funded our entire oncology wing. You were here for the ribbon cutting, spoke about your mother's cancer, about making sure families could stay together during treatment. Her eyes widened as she turned to Marcus, understanding dawning like sunrise breaking over a dark ocean. And you were here too, Mr. Reed. Your wife was one of our first patients in the new wing. I remember because we were still getting the equipment set up, still learning the systems, and you never left her side. Not once in those final weeks. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment, sound fading as if Marcus were underwater, drowning in the implication of what Nurse Jennings had just revealed. He stared at Catherine, whose face had gone completely white, fingers gripping the hospital bed rail until her knuckles matched the sheets. You funded the wing where Claire was treated. The words came out flat, emotionless, his mind struggling to process this new dimension of connection, or coincidence, or fate. He couldn't tell which, couldn't sort through the tangle of causation and consequence fast enough. Hayes Family Foundation. Miss Hayes personally oversaw the project after her own mother died of cancer. Nurse Jennings confirmed, oblivious to the tension filling the room like smoke, to the way Catherine had stopped breathing and Marcus had stopped thinking. She insisted on private family rooms so patients wouldn't have to be separated from their loved ones during the hardest moments. The whole design focused on dignity and comfort at the end of life. Nurse Jennings glanced at her tablet, professional again now that the shock of recognition had passed. Maya's looking much better. The antibiotics are working. We'll need to keep her overnight for observation, but her blood work is promising. The fever should continue to drop over the next few hours. After the nurse left, silence stretched between them like a living thing, charged with questions and revelations that kept compounding. Maya had fallen back asleep, medication and exhaustion pulling her under, leaving the adults to navigate the wreckage of secrets finally exposed. You knew who I was when you got in my car that night. Marcus's voice was barely audible over the beeping monitors, over the distant sounds of hospital activity filtering through the closed door. Catherine's hands trembled as she stood, moving to the window that overlooked the parking lot where ambulances came and went with their cargo of human suffering. I recognized your name when you introduced yourself. Reed isn't common, and something about your face seemed familiar, like I'd seen you before but couldn't place where. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. But I didn't seek you out, Marcus. I had no idea you worked at that supermarket. My car really did break down. I was supposed to meet a former employee who had information about the board's plans, was supposed to get evidence and disappear. Finding you was... She paused, searching for words adequate to the strange coincidence that had brought them together. I don't know what it was. Fate, maybe, if you believe in that? Luck or chance or the universe's sick sense of humor. But you remembered meeting me? The question felt important somehow, a key piece in a puzzle he couldn't yet see clearly. Not exactly meeting. I remember seeing you. Catherine turned from the window, eyes red but dry, voice thick with emotion she was barely controlling. The husband who never left his wife's side, even when the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. Even when keeping vigil meant sleeping in chairs that wrecked your back and eating vending machine food for weeks. The father who read stories to his little girl in the waiting room, making different voices for each character, even though your own voice was breaking with exhaustion. Her eyes met his, raw with emotion. I remember thinking that was what real love looked like. Not the romantic movie version with grand gestures and perfect lighting, but the grinding daily reality of showing up when it's hard, of choosing to be present even when presence means watching someone you love slip away piece by piece. Maya, who had been feigning sleep but following this exchange with growing interest despite her medicated haze, suddenly brightened with the resilience only children possess. So you're the lady who built the special rooms where Mommy stayed? Dad says those doctors and nurses were angels, that they made Mom's last days as peaceful as possible. Catherine's composure finally broke completely, all the corporate armor dissolving as a single tear slid down her cheek, followed by another. She nodded, reaching out to brush Maya's hair from her forehead with fingers that shook. My mother had cancer too, Maya. Lung cancer that spread before they caught it. I wanted to build a place where families could be together during the hard times, where little girls wouldn't have to be separated from their parents, where there were rooms big enough for whole families to gather and say goodbye properly. Marcus felt the room tilt again, but differently this time, not with betrayal, but with the strange vertigo of fate or providence or whatever force had brought them together. The truth was reconstructing itself in his mind, not erasing the lies, but adding layers of complexity he hadn't imagined. Had their meeting really been coincidence? Or something more like gravity pulling together two people marked by similar losses, shaped by the same kind of grief? Why didn't you tell me? He fought to keep his voice steady, fought against the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm his careful control. At first, I couldn't tell anyone anything. I didn't know who I could trust. Didn't know if the people hunting me had connections to law enforcement, or private investigators, or worse. Catherine sat back down, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Then, as days passed, I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me differently, treat me differently. Afraid you'd think I was crazy for running away from my own company, for hiding in a stranger's apartment instead of fighting the board directly. Afraid of losing the only real connection I've had in years, the only place where people valued me for who I am instead of what I control or what I'm worth on paper. She looked at Maya, then at Marcus, vulnerability naked on her face. Afraid of losing this family you let me borrow for a few days. This feeling of being part of something real and ordinary and precious. The naked honesty in her voice struck Marcus more powerfully than any explanation could have. In that moment, Looking at Catherine's unguarded expression as she watched over his daughter, he realized that whatever mask she'd worn as Kate Miller, the emotions behind it had been genuine. The question was whether that would be enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds, or whether she would disappear back into her corporate life, leaving them with another Catherine-shaped hole to patch over. Neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across from the hospital for the past hour, its tinted windows concealing the man inside who spoke quietly into a phone. "We found her, and you won't believe who she's with. Marcus Reed, the security guard. Yes, the same one from the foundation opening. This changes everything." The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 black SUVs parked outside the hospital, with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Catherine spotted them from Maya's window and went pale, her coffee cup trembling in her hand, dark liquid spilling over her fingers, though she didn't seem to notice. "They found me." Her voice carried resignation and fear in equal measure. The brief flicker of hope from the previous night's revelations extinguished like a candle in wind. Marcus watched her transform before his eyes, spine straightening, shoulders squaring, chin lifting as if preparing for battle. The Kate who'd made pancakes in his kitchen disappeared, replaced by Catherine Hayes, CEO, donning invisible armor that had been stripped away during her time in hiding. Within an hour, the hospital lobby filled with people in expensive suits, lawyers with leather portfolios checking platinum watches, corporate executives speaking in hushed tones through discreet earpieces, security personnel who looked like they could bench press small cars. They moved with practiced coordination, clearing civilians from their path without seeming to notice them, creating a bubble of corporate power that ordinary people instinctively avoided. Leading them was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes like winter storms, pale blue, cold, calculating. Her tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Marcus's yearly salary, cut with precision that spoke of personal tailors and fittings in cities where people spent thousands on clothes without blinking. She introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Cross, senior partner at Hayes Industries law firm, her voice cultured and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "Miss Hayes, you've caused quite a stir. The board has been very concerned about your well-being." Catherine stood at the window, shoulders back, perfectly composed except for the white-knuckled grip on the windowsill behind her that Marcus could see from across the room. Maya, still in her hospital bed but alert now, looked between the adults with growing concern, instinctively reaching for Marcus's hand as tension thickened the air. Eleanor Cross launched into a practiced speech about corporate responsibility, fiduciary duty, and the chaos Catherine's disappearance had caused. Stock prices plummeting 22%, 3 major deals stalled in negotiation, international partners threatening to withdraw from contracts worth hundreds of millions. The board of directors was considering emergency measures to maintain stability, to protect shareholder value, to ensure the company her father built didn't collapse under the weight of uncertainty. "You have obligations, Miss Hayes." Eleanor's voice softened to something almost maternal, but with steel beneath, like a velvet glove over an iron fist. "To 50,000 employees who depend on this company for their livelihoods. To millions of shareholders who've invested their retirement funds and children's college savings. Personal feelings are a luxury you cannot afford when so many lives depend on your decisions." Catherine listened with the expression of someone receiving a death sentence, resigned, hollow-eyed, trapped by responsibilities she'd built for herself over decades. When Eleanor finished, the room fell silent except for the beeping of Maya's monitors and distant sounds of hospital activity, the mundane symphony of life continuing regardless of individual dramas. "I need 5 minutes. 5 minutes alone with my friends." Catherine's voice was quiet but firm, carrying authority that made even Eleanor Cross pause. Eleanor checked her watch with obvious irritation, time measured in billable hours and corporate crises. "Miss Hayes, the corporate jet is waiting. We have a shareholders meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow in New York. The board expects you to reassure them of your continued leadership and mental fitness, to put these rumors to rest before more damage is done." Catherine's voice turned sharp, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, without delay. I said 5 minutes. Unless you want to explain to the board why their CEO had a nervous breakdown in a hospital room, you'll give me space to say goodbye properly, to end this with dignity instead of dragging me out like a fugitive. Something passed between the two women, an understanding based on years of professional relationship, of battles fought in boardrooms and negotiations won through careful strategy. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, assessing the situation with cold calculation, weighing options and consequences with the speed of someone trained to think 3 moves ahead. 5 minutes. Not a second more. We have a situation brewing that requires your immediate attention. Crisis management that can't wait for sentiment. She gestured for the others to step outside, and the door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded as final as a prison cell locking, as permanent as a coffin being lowered into the ground. When they were alone, Catherine turned to Marcus and Maya with tears streaming down her face, no longer bothering to maintain her corporate mask, letting them see the woman beneath the power and wealth and responsibility. I have to go. If I don't, they'll destroy everything I've worked to build. Everything my father spent 40 years creating. 50,000 people depend on Hayes Industries for their jobs, for health insurance, for the ability to feed their families and send their children to college. If the wrong people take control, if the board succeeds in their plan. She couldn't finish, emotion overwhelming careful articulation. Maya's lower lip trembled, her small face screwing up with the effort of not crying, of being brave, even though her world was breaking. But we depend on you, too. Can't they find someone else to run the company? Can't you choose us instead? Catherine knelt beside the hospital bed, eye level with Maya, smoothing the child's hair with gentle fingers that had signed billion-dollar contracts but now trembled with simple human sorrow. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, sweetheart. Choices between what we want and what we're responsible for, between personal happiness and protecting people who can't protect themselves. She took a shaky breath, fighting for composure. But I want you to know that these past weeks with you and your dad have been the happiest of my life. The most real, the most human, the most like the person I want to be instead of the person circumstances made me. Maya launched herself forward, thin arms wrapping around Catherine's neck in a fierce hug that nearly knocked them both over. You're the only one who understands about the stars and black holes and why my science projects matter. Dad tries, he really does, but he doesn't get it the way you do. Marcus's throat tightened, watching the embrace. The simple truth in his daughter's words stung, not because they were meant to hurt, but because they were accurate. Catherine had connected with Maya in ways he'd struggled to since Claire's death, filling gaps he hadn't even realized existed until someone showed him what was missing. Catherine held Maya tightly, eyes closed, memorizing the moment like she was saving it for darker days ahead. I'll always understand about the stars, Maya. Even when I'm not here, even when I'm in boardrooms pretending to care about quarterly earnings and market share. And your dad understands the most important thing. How amazing you are. How special. How much you deserve to be loved and protected and encouraged to be exactly who you are. She gently disentangled herself and turned to Marcus. And he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, because he could admit that now, at least to himself, in this moment of ending, warring with the corporate executive she had to be. Thank you for showing me what a real family looks like. I'd forgotten, or maybe I never knew. Never had it growing up in houses too big for real intimacy, with parents too busy building empires to build connections. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, sharp edges piercing his lungs. So that's it. You just walk away? Go back to your billions and boardrooms like this never happened? Like we were just some temporary shelter from a storm that's past? Catherine stood slowly, transforming back into the powerful woman the lawyers expected, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the hospital visitor's pass still clipped to her borrowed sweater. What choice do I have? Her voice held a bitter edge, self-awareness cutting deep. You were right yesterday. I have billions of dollars, and you work security at a grocery store. I live in boardrooms and penthouses, and you live in the real world. Maybe it's better this way. Clean break, No prolonged suffering, no pretending we can bridge a gap that wide. But her voice shook on the last words, betraying the pain she was trying to hide behind pragmatic acceptance. Maya sat up straighter in her hospital bed, arms crossed over her chest with determination that reminded Marcus so much of Claire, it made his heart ache. That's stupid. Money doesn't make someone a good person. Dad always says it's what you do when nobody's watching that counts, when there's no reward except knowing you did right. Catherine smiled through her tears, maternal affection and sorrow mixing on her face. Your dad is a very wise man. And you're right. Character matters more than credentials, actions more than assets. And you're a good person when nobody's watching. I've seen you, Maya insisted with the absolute certainty only children possess before doubt teaches them to question their observations. You talk to spiders instead of squishing them. You always save the last cookie for someone else. You fold the towels the way Dad likes, even though you think it's silly. That's who you really are. The simple observations hit harder than any elaborate declaration could have, cutting through corporate justifications and practical objections to reach the emotional core Catherine was trying to protect. A sharp knock interrupted them. Eleanor Cross peered through the door window, tapping her watch meaningfully. 5 minutes expired. Time to return to the real world, where billions were at stake, and personal feelings were luxuries reserved for people without empires to protect. Catherine straightened her shoulders, and Marcus watched the transformation complete itself. The vulnerable woman who'd shared their dinner table disappeared entirely, replaced by a corporate leader worth billions who moved in worlds he couldn't begin to understand. She kissed Maya's forehead gently, lingering like she was trying to memorize the sensation. Be good for your dad, okay? And remember that bonus moms never really leave. They just love you from farther away, carry you in their hearts, even when distance keeps them from being there in person. Then she turned to Marcus, mask slipping just enough to let him see the woman underneath, scared, uncertain, grieving a loss that hadn't happened yet. Thank you for giving me a home when I needed one most, for treating a stranger with kindness when you had every reason to protect yourself and your daughter from complications. Before he could respond, she was gone, swept away by lawyers and executives toward a life of private jets and shareholder meetings, leaving behind only the memory of 3 weeks when she'd been Kate Miller instead of Catherine Hayes. Maya cried quietly as they watched the SUVs pull away from the hospital parking lot. Marcus held her close, his own heart breaking as Catherine disappeared back into her world of power and privilege. Will we ever see her again? Maya asked, wiping tears with the back of her hand. Marcus didn't have an answer. How could he explain that sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between different worlds, that people like them and people like Catherine lived in separate orbits that rarely intersected except by accident or fate? I don't know, sweetheart. But she cared about us. That was real. Whatever else was complicated or difficult. That night, after bringing Maya home from the hospital, 24 hours of observation and intravenous antibiotics had done their work, Marcus found Catherine's expensive silk scarf folded neatly on the coffee table beside a handwritten note on Hayes Industries stationery. Her handwriting was precise, but with artistic flourish to the capital letters. The note was brief, devastating in its simplicity. Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. Take care of each other. C. Marcus held the silk fabric to his face, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume. He wondered how someone could become so essential to your life in just 3 weeks, carving out a space that seemed impossible to fill once they were gone. The apartment felt wrong without her. Too quiet, too ordinary, too much like the life they'd been living before she arrived and showed them what was missing. 2 weeks passed in a haze of normal routine that felt anything but normal. Marcus used Catherine's money, finally, pragmatically, after Maya's next asthma attack reminded him that pride was indeed a luxury he couldn't afford, to refill her prescriptions and stock up on medications. The guilt of accepting help warred with relief at knowing his daughter could breathe easier. Maya went back to school, grades slipping slightly in science without Catherine's patient explanations. They both pretended not to notice the Catherine-shaped hole in their daily lives. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end made his heart stop. "Marcus, it's Catherine. I need your help." She sounded different, strained, frightened in a way that reminded him of that first night in the rain, the polished CEO gone, and only the terrified woman remaining. "I know I have no right to ask, no right to pull you back into my mess after I left the way I did, but I'm out of options and running out of time." "Where are you?" He stepped into the hallway so Maya wouldn't overhear, pressing the phone tightly to his ear. "New York, but I won't be for long if they succeed." Her words tumbled out in a rush. "Marcus, they're going to destroy me. The board has fabricated evidence that I've been embezzling funds, creating a paper trail of theft and corporate malfeasance that will have me arrested tomorrow morning." They've been siphoning money for years, selling proprietary technology in ways that violate federal regulations. She took a shaky breath. "I have proof of everything. Documents that show the real corruption, evidence that demonstrates their conspiracy. But I need someone they can't buy or intimidate to deliver them to the FBI. Someone they would never suspect of being connected to me." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to save my life and the lives of 50,000 workers whose jobs they'll eliminate once they gain control of the company." Catherine's voice broke with the weight of her request. "I know it's too much to ask. I know I have no right after lying to you, after leaving the way I did. But you're the only person I trust." Marcus closed his eyes, familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He thought of Maya in the next room, thought of their quiet life finally finding its rhythm. Getting involved would mean danger, complications, possibly putting his daughter at risk. But it would also mean Catherine might come home. "What do you need me to do?" The package arrived via courier 3 hours later, a man in a nondescript uniform who handed Marcus a sealed envelope and left without conversation. Inside, an encrypted flash drive, a burner phone with one number programmed, and instructions in Catherine's precise handwriting. "Trust Jackson. FBI. Contact Agent Sarah Collins, Hartford Field Office. Evidence on drive proves board conspiracy. Offshore accounts, illegal technology transfers, falsified records. They'll come for you once they realize what you have. Keep Maya safe. I'm sorry. C." Also inside, $20,000 in cash. Marcus stared at the money, pride warring with practicality. Mrs. Patterson agreed to pick Maya up from school, her weathered face creasing with concern. "You be careful, Marcus Reed. That girl's already lost one parent." The meet with Jackson happened in a parking garage downtown. Catherine's head of security looked exactly like Marcus expected, 6'2", built like someone who lifted trucks for exercise, eyes that missed nothing. "Catherine says you're solid, that you'll do right by this even though it puts you at risk." Jackson's voice carried southern inflections. "The board's got people everywhere. Cops on payroll, judges who owe favors. Once they realize you've got evidence, they'll come hard and fast." Jackson outlined the plan. Meet Agent Collins at the FBI field office, hand over evidence directly. Simple in theory, complicated by reality. "Catherine also asked me to give you this." Jackson handed over the cash envelope. "For Maya's medication, for anything you need. Non-negotiable." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he thought of Claire. "Tell her I'll use it for Maya. But I'm doing this to bring her home, not for money." Jackson's expression softened. "She said you'd say something like that." The drive to Hartford FBI field office should have been straightforward, but Marcus spotted the tail within 5 miles, a black sedan maintaining perfect distance. His security training kicked in, years of watching parking lots suddenly useful in ways he'd never imagined. He turned into an active construction site, dodging between equipment. The sedan followed until a cement mixer blocked the path. Marcus abandoned his car and ran, the flash drive pressed against his chest. Behind him, car doors slammed and voices shouted. He emerged 3 blocks away, lungs burning, and flagged a taxi. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked into the FBI field office on foot, anonymous among downtown pedestrians. Agent Sarah Collins was younger than he expected, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened to his story in a windowless conference room, taking notes while Marcus explained about Catherine, the board conspiracy, the evidence on the drive. "And you're doing this because—" Her question wasn't accusatory, just curious. "Because it's right. Because 50,000 people depend on jobs that criminals are trying to destroy for profit. Because someone I care about asked for help. And I'm not the kind of man who walks away when things get hard." Collins studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Reed, the people you're accusing have resources you can't imagine. If this evidence isn't solid, they'll bury you." "Then it's good the evidence is solid." Marcus slid the flash drive across the table. Catherine Hayes wouldn't risk her company and her freedom on anything less than airtight proof. Collins inserted the drive into an air-gapped laptop, eyes widening as she scrolled through files. Bank records showing systematic embezzlement, communications proving conspiracy, technology transfer documents that violated federal regulations. Years of criminal activity documented with overwhelming thoroughness. This is substantial. This is prosecutable. She looked up. "But Mr. Reed, we're talking about a case that could take months to build. These people have already proven they're willing to break laws. What makes you think they'll hesitate to threaten a witness?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Jackson's number. "They know. Someone inside the hospital told them about you and Catherine. Get somewhere safe and stay there." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Maya's at school. I need already handled. Mrs. Patterson picked her up early. She's at your apartment with 2 of my people outside." "But Marcus, there's something else." Jackson paused. "The school had another visitor today. Woman claiming to be Maya's aunt, trying to pick her up early. Teacher got suspicious, called the office, and the woman disappeared. But she had details, knew Maya's medical history, knew about Claire." The conference room tilted sideways. Someone had tried to take his daughter. "I need to go. I need to get to Maya." Marcus stood so fast the chair toppled backward. Collins held up a hand. "Mr. Reed, running to your daughter right now is exactly what they want. They'll follow you, confirm the connection, and use her as leverage. The best thing you can do is let trained professionals keep her safe while we move on this evidence. She's 9 years old. She's scared and she needs her father. And she needs her father alive and free." Collins's expression softened, but her eyes stayed hard. "We can offer protective custody for both of you. Safe, but if you want me to pull them back, if you want to handle this differently, what I want is for this to be over, for Maya to be safe, and for the people who tried to take my daughter to face consequences." His voice came out harder than he intended. "Tell me about Project Prometheus. Tell me what's really happening here, because attempted kidnapping feels like more than just corporate fraud." Silence stretched across the connection, and when Catherine spoke again, her voice carried the weight of secrets finally confronting daylight. "It's not just about money or company control. My father developed technology 27 years ago, neural interface systems that were revolutionary, dangerous, worth billions. He and his partners conducted experiments that violated every ethical standard." She took a shaky breath. "One of those test subjects died." Subject 37, killed by catastrophic neural cascade when the technology malfunctioned. My mother, Dr. Diana Hayes, was the lead neuroscientist on the project. She wanted to shut everything down, report the death to authorities, and someone killed her for it, made it look like a car accident by cutting her brake lines. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. "Your mother was murdered because she wanted to do the right thing. And now the same people are coming after you." "Not the same people, worse people." Catherine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Dr. Nathan Cross. He was my mother's research assistant, Subject 37's older brother. He spent 27 years gathering pieces of Project Prometheus, waiting for legal protections to expire so he could finish what my mother tried to stop. And he'll do anything to get the complete research, including threatening a 9-year-old girl. He's beyond threatening, Marcus.
The attempted kidnapping wasn't about leverage. It was about acquisition. He doesn't want to threaten Maya. He wants to use her. Horror replaced anger. Use her how? The neural interface technology was designed for young subjects, children with sufficient neural plasticity to integrate with the systems. Subject 37 was 19 when she died, but the research suggested younger would be better, safer, more successful. Catherine's voice cracked.
Marcus, I'm so sorry.
I brought this into your life, put Maya at risk because I was desperate and scared. I should have stayed away. Tell me how to end this. Tell me how to make my daughter safe. Marcus's voice came out cold, controlled, every emotion channeled into focus. We need Nathan Cross in custody before he can move on Maya again. We need the FBI to understand this isn't just corporate fraud, but something far more dangerous. Catherine paused. The original research is in 3 locations: my father's estate in Farmington, the Hayes Foundation archives, and my mother's personal safe deposit box. Nathan's been systematically breaking into each one. If we can get to the final location first, if we can use the complete research as bait, we set a trap, force him to come to us on ground we control, with FBI ready to arrest him. Agent Collins had been listening on speaker. Miss Hayes, this is Special Agent Sarah Collins, FBI Hartford Field Office. What you're describing, technology with defense applications, research involving human experimentation, that moves this from corporate crime into national security territory. Do what you need to do, Agent Collins. But please understand that every hour of delay is an hour Nathan Cross can use to move against Marcus and Maya. Catherine's desperation came through clearly. My mother died trying to stop this. I won't let her sacrifice be meaningless. Collins exchanged glances with Marcus. Where's the final research location? Connecticut First National Bank, downtown Hartford. Safe deposit box registered under my mother's maiden name, Diana Whitmore. I have the key, but the bank requires biometric identification that only I can provide. Catherine's voice carried both hope and fear. We'd have to do this together, Marcus. When can you be here? 3 hours if I leave now. Tell Marcus to meet me at the bank, and, Agent Collins, please make sure there are enough people protecting Maya that Nathan Cross would have to be suicidal to make another attempt. The call ended. Marcus called Maya on the burner phone, hearing her brave attempt to sound unconcerned, even though her voice shook. Dad, these men say they're friends of Kate's. They won't let me leave the apartment. Baby, I need you to trust me. Some bad people are trying to cause problems, but we're fixing it. By tonight, this will all be over. Is Kate okay? Is she in trouble because of us? The question revealed how much Maya understood. Kate's fine, and none of this is because of you. Bad people do bad things because that's who they are, not because good people exist. You remember that, Maya. Being good doesn't cause evil. When this is over, will she come back? Will she stay this time? Marcus's throat tightened. I don't know, baby. But I know she cares about you more than she cares about boardrooms and quarterly earnings. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Catherine arrived exactly at 2 p.m., stepping out of a hired car wearing borrowed clothes, jeans and a plain sweater instead of executive armor. But her eyes were steel, determination replacing vulnerability. She moved straight to him, no hesitation, and for a moment they just stood there. 2 people who'd shared 3 weeks of unlikely domesticity, now reunited for purposes neither had imagined. I'm sorry. For all of it, the lies, the danger, the way I left. I'm sorry. We'll talk about sorry later. Right now, we need to focus on ending this so Maya can feel safe. Marcus kept his voice level, emotions locked down tight. Collins materialized with 2 other agents, all dressed like bank customers. The safe deposit area is monitored. We've got visual on all entrances. If Nathan Cross is watching this bank, he'll know the moment you enter the vault area. That's the point. We need him to commit. Catherine's voice carried certainty. The research is the only leverage I have left. They descended into the vault area,
Marcus hyper-aware of every person they passed. The safe deposit boxes lined walls in regimented rows, anonymous steel containers holding secrets and valuables. Catherine's box required 2 keys, hers and the bank's, plus biometric verification that scanned her retina. The technology was outdated but effective, clicking open with mechanical precision. Inside, a leather journal, several USB drives wrapped in anti-static bags, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Victoria, when necessary." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she removed the contents. The journal was her mother's, filled with precise scientific notation and ethical observations. The USB drives contained raw data, neural scan results, test subject responses, the catastrophic failure that killed Subject 37. But the envelope held something different. Catherine opened it with shaking fingers, extracting a single sheet covered in her mother's handwriting. "Victoria, if you're reading this, you've begun questioning Project Prometheus's origins. The complete research should never be reconstructed. Nathan believes science should progress regardless of cost. He's wrong, but he's also dangerous. Brilliant enough to finish what we fragmented, ruthless enough to harm anyone who stands in his way." Catherine's voice broke as she read, "He loved Emma deeply, but grief has twisted that love into something toxic. If he comes for this research, don't try to reason with him. He's beyond reason." The final paragraph carried a mother's desperate hope across 27 years. "Trust no one who expresses interest in the original research. The doors we opened cannot be closed again, but they can be guarded. Be brave, be careful, and know that I'm proud of the woman you'll become." Catherine finished reading and stood motionless. Marcus reached for her hand, offering comfort, and she gripped his fingers hard enough to hurt. Above them, through walls and floors, trouble was coming. Collins's voice crackled through Marcus's discreet earpiece. "We have movement. 3 individuals entering the bank. Recommend abort and extract now." "No, we need this arrest." Catherine's voice was steel. "Tell your people to be ready, but let them come." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to prioritize safety, but he understood Catherine's logic. Running now meant living under threat indefinitely, meant Maya growing up with bodyguards and fear. They moved toward the exit, carrying Diana Hayes's research like a talisman. The vault area led to a narrow corridor, then stairs to the main lobby, architectural design that created choke points and limited escape routes. The first sign of trouble was the door at the top of the stairs, locked from the outside. The second was the lights cutting out, emergency systems failing, plunging them into darkness broken only by exit signs. "Federal agents, identify yourself!" Collins's voice echoed in the confined space. The response came from speakers Marcus hadn't noticed. Agent Collins, I presume, and Catherine Hayes, finally willing to acknowledge her mother's work. Nathan Cross sounded cultured, rational, nothing like the madman Diana's letter described. "The research belongs to me by right. My sister's blood purchased it. You can surrender those materials peacefully, or I can take them by force." Marcus pulled Catherine behind him instinctively. "You're not taking anything except a prison sentence." Nathan's laugh carried no humor. "The security guard who thinks he's a hero." "Catherine, you've developed interesting taste. From boardrooms to blue collar. Is this rebellion or genuine affection? What you can't tell would fill libraries, Nathan. You couldn't tell that your obsession killed your sister, that pushing for human trials before safety protocols were established made you complicit in her death." Catherine's voice carried cutting precision. "And you can't tell the difference between honoring someone's memory and desecrating it by finishing work they died trying to stop." Silence stretched, and when Nathan spoke again, the cultivated rationality had cracked. "Your mother was weak. Emma's death was tragic, but not meaningless. She advanced human knowledge. Completing the work honors her sacrifice. Completion dishonors her by making her death one step in process instead of stopping point. Catherine trembled against Marcus's back. You want to create more Subject 37? More dead teenagers? That's not honor, Nathan. That's compounding tragedy.
The lights flickered back on, revealing their situation. Nathan Cross stood at the top of the stairs with two associates. One the woman who tried to take Maya from school, the other a blank-faced man who radiated professional violence. They were trapped, outmaneuvered. But Collins and her team weren't idle. Marcus heard movement in the walls, coordinated response developing. Nathan descended 3 steps, hands spread. It doesn't have to end violently. Give me the research and walk away. My mother started a project to help locked-in patients. You perverted that into consciousness transfer and neural immortality. Catherine stepped from behind Marcus. The research dies with me before it goes to you. I'll destroy every drive, burn every page, rather than let you create more victims. Nathan's face twisted with emotion. Then you die with it. And the security guard, and anyone else who stands between me and completing Emma's legacy. The woman beside Nathan moved with predatory speed, drawing a weapon that turned negotiations into hostage crisis. But Marcus had spent 20 years reading situations, anticipating violence. He grabbed Catherine and dropped, pulling her down as the first shot rang out. Not from Nathan's associate, but from Collins. The narrow corridor turned into chaos. Marcus covered Catherine with his own body, protecting her while praying federal training proved superior to criminal desperation. More shots, shouted commands, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Marcus couldn't track events, could only press Catherine against the floor and pray they'd survive. Then silence, broken by ragged breathing. Marcus risked lifting his head. Nathan Cross lay on the stairs, blood spreading from a shoulder wound. His female associate was down, not moving, Collins standing over her with weapon trained. The third person had surrendered immediately, hands raised. Suspect in custody. Need medical and additional units. Collins spoke into her radio with professional calm. Catherine was shaking in Marcus's arms, adrenaline crash setting in. He held her, offering stability while his own heart hammered. Is it over? Please tell me this is actually over. Her voice came out small. It's over. Nathan Cross is going to prison. The research is secured, and Maya can come home. Marcus helped Catherine to her feet as paramedics and law enforcement flooded the area. They gave statements, surrendered research materials, endured questioning that felt interminable. Through it all, Marcus kept one hand on his phone, waiting for permission to call Maya. When Collins finally nodded, he dialed with trembling fingers. Dad? Are you okay? Maya's voice carried forced bravery. I'm fine, baby. Everything's fine. Kate and I are both okay, and the bad people are arrested. You can come home now. No more bodyguards, no more hiding. Kate's with you? She came back? Hope transformed Maya's tone. Does that mean she's staying? Marcus looked at Catherine, who was watching him with expression too complex to interpret quickly. That's something we need to talk about. All 3 of us together. But Maya, I want you to know that Kate fought really hard to keep you safe. That she risked everything because she cares about you that much. He ended the call and turned to Catherine, acknowledging the question hanging between them. What now? Where do we go from here? Before either could speak, Eleanor Cross arrived with her entourage, expression thunderous as she took in the scene. Miss Hayes, we need to have a very serious conversation about your responsibilities. The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow morning. The board expects your presence. Catherine looked at Eleanor, then at Marcus, then at the research materials now in evidence bags. When she spoke, her voice carried certainty. Tell the board I resign, effective immediately. My shares remain mine, my foundation continues, but I'm stepping down as CEO. Eleanor's face transformed to genuine shock. You're resigning? After fighting for 6 weeks, after risking everything, you're simply walking away? I'm walking away from the prison I built for myself. The company will continue under new leadership. Catherine's shoulders straightened.
You were right when you said I had obligations to 50,000 employees, but I also have obligations to myself, to my mother's memory, to the people who showed me what real life looks like. She turned to Marcus, expression softening into something vulnerable and hopeful. If they'll have me, if a 9-year-old girl is willing to share her dad with someone who's learning how to be human again. Marcus thought of Maya asking if Catherine would stay, of their apartment that had felt complete for 3 weeks, of Claire's memory not erased, but honored by new love existing alongside old. Maya's been asking when you're coming home since the day you left. I think that's your answer right there. Spring arrived in Millbrook with determined optimism, cherry blossoms dotting the park across from what used to be Marcus's bachelor apartment, but was now something entirely different. Home, in the fullest sense, built not from square footage or property values, but from the accumulated moments of 3 people choosing each other every single day. The morning sun slanted through kitchen windows that Catherine had insisted on enlarging during the renovation, flooding the space with light that turned ordinary breakfast into something approaching sacred. Marcus stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the easy competence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, while Maya, 12 now, taller and somehow both more herself and more like Claire with each passing year, sat at the table with her latest science journal spread before her like a treasure map. "Dad, Kate, look at this." She waved the publication with barely contained excitement, the kind of enthusiasm that made Marcus's chest tighten with love so fierce it sometimes scared him. "My article got published in the Youth Science Quarterly, the one about electromagnetic field applications in medical technology." Catherine moved from the coffee maker to examine the journal, still wearing Marcus's old Millbrook High t-shirt as pajamas, despite owning closets full of designer clothes she rarely touched anymore. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, face free of makeup, and Marcus thought, not for the first time, that she'd never been more beautiful than in these unguarded morning moments when she was just Kate, just his partner, just Maya's bonus mom. Black Holes in Family Systems: How Invisible Forces Shape Our Universe. Catherine read the title with obvious pride, her thumb tracing Maya's byline. "This is incredible, sweetheart." The astronomy sections are brilliant, but I love how you connected gravitational relationships to family dynamics. That's original thinking. The gravity metaphor was my idea. Maya beamed with the confidence of a child who'd been consistently encouraged to trust her own intellect, to believe her observations mattered. I compared how families stay together even when you can't see the connection, how invisible forces keep people in orbit around each other. Mr. Patterson said it was the best student paper he'd read in 20 years of teaching. Marcus slid a plate of pancakes onto the table, golden brown, perfectly imperfect, made with the pinch of salt Claire had taught him and the extra chocolate Maya preferred. Your mom would be so proud, not just of the publication, but of how you think. That questioning mind, that refusal to accept simple answers when complex ones exist. The mention of Claire came naturally now, woven into their daily conversation, without the sharp edges that had made Marcus avoid her name for so long. Catherine had insisted from the beginning that Claire's presence remain visible, honored, integrated into their new family structure, rather than awkwardly ignored or uncomfortably replaced. "I think Mom and Kate would have been friends," Maya said thoughtfully, pouring syrup in careful spirals. "They both believe science should help people, not just make rich people richer. And they both think I'm smart enough to understand complicated things if someone explains them right." Catherine sat beside Maya, shoulder touching the girls in casual affection that had taken months to build, but now felt as natural as breathing. "Your mom sounds like she was an extraordinary person. And you're right, we would have been friends." Anyone who raised you with such kindness and curiosity and courage understood what matters. The words carried no jealousy, no competition, just genuine appreciation for the woman who'd shaped Maya's foundation. Catherine had learned, through patient trial and error, that love didn't divide, but multiplied. That honoring Claire made room for new affection rather than diminishing it. Marcus joined them at the table, the 3 of them falling into the comfortable rhythm of family breakfast. They'd bought the apartment next door 6 months ago, knocked down walls to create a genuine 2-bedroom with actual space. But Marcus had insisted on keeping the small kitchen table from his bachelor days. Some things were worth preserving, not for their monetary value, but for their emotional weight. The scarred surface that had witnessed Claire's final months, Maya's homework struggles, Catherine's integration into their lives.
"So what's on the agenda today?" Marcus asked, mentally cataloging his schedule.
Morning shift at the Hayes Community Center, where he now worked as operations director. Afternoon meeting with the youth mentorship program. Evening free for whatever Maya needed. I have that presentation about sustainable agriculture at school.
Maya consulted her meticulously organized planner, a trait inherited from Claire's scientific precision and enhanced by Catherine's strategic thinking. Then soccer practice at 4, and I promised Mrs. Patterson I'd help her with her computer. She keeps deleting her email by accident. Catherine smiled at the mention of their elderly neighbor who'd become an unofficial grandmother to Maya and an unexpected friend to Catherine herself. Mrs. Patterson, 75 now and still wielding that shotgun whenever she thinks someone needs protecting. I saw her yesterday morning doing Tai Chi in her garden, with perfect form. She says the secret to longevity is staying useful and staying armed. Marcus laughed, remembering the night 3 years ago when their elderly neighbor had held off Nathan Cross's accomplice with a 12-gauge and the kind of steady nerve that came from surviving 7 decades of life's complications. Hard to argue with results. I have board meetings this afternoon. Catherine's voice carried none of the tension that had once accompanied mentions of corporate responsibility. Hayes Industries' new Ethics Oversight Committee. We're reviewing applications for the Community Technology Grant Program, making sure the money goes to projects that actually help people rather than just generating profit. She'd kept her promise to resign as CEO, but remaining as board chair had allowed her to reshape the company from within. Slower than revolution, but more sustainable than burning everything down and starting over. Eleanor Cross had proven an unexpected ally in the transformation, her legal expertise deployed toward reform rather than corporate protection. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Maya's questions about neural interface applications in prosthetics and Catherine's patient explanations of how her mother's original vision had finally been realized. Ethical implementation that helped rather than harmed. Transparent research that prioritized patient safety over profit margins. Have you thought more about the memorial? Marcus asked carefully, knowing the topic was still tender despite 3 years of healing. The dedication is next month. They'll want you to speak. Catherine's hands stilled around her coffee mug, steam rising like questions she wasn't sure how to answer. They're dedicating the neuroscience wing to my mother, Diana Hayes, who died trying to prevent the exact kind of exploitation that almost destroyed our family. It feels right and completely overwhelming in equal measure. You don't have to speak if you're not ready. Marcus reached across the table to cover her hand with his. They'll understand. Anyone who knew your mother would understand that some grief doesn't operate on public timelines. No, I want to. Catherine's voice firmed with decision. I want to tell people who she really was. Not just the brilliant scientist, but the ethical warrior who understood that some doors shouldn't open no matter how tempting the knowledge behind them. I want Maya to know her grandmother through more than just genetics and inherited intelligence. Maya looked up from her pancakes, syrup glistening on her chin. Will you tell them about how she saved me? About how her research almost got used wrong, but you and Dad stopped it? I'll tell them that your grandmother believed science should serve humanity, not the other way around. Catherine reached over to wipe Maya's chin with maternal efficiency that had become second nature. That she understood progress without ethics is just destruction wearing a lab coat, and that the bravest thing she ever did was walk away from work that could have made her famous in order to protect people who'd never know her name. The kitchen fell into comfortable silence. The kind that only happened when people knew each other well enough that words became optional rather than mandatory. Marcus watched his daughter and his partner, his family, chosen and built and maintained through daily decisions to show up even when it was hard, and felt the familiar swell of gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed them with its intensity. 3 years ago, he'd been a security guard with $67 in his wallet, raising a daughter alone and trying not to drown in grief that still felt fresh despite time's passage. Now he directed a community center that touched hundreds of lives,
loved a woman who'd walked away from billions to build something real, and watched his daughter become the kind of person who published scientific papers at 12 and still remembered to help elderly neighbors with their computers. "I need to get ready for school," Maya announced, carrying her plate to the sink with automatic responsibility. "Mr. Patterson wants to discuss my project before the presentation, and I need to review my notes." She paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at Marcus and Catherine with expression too wise for 12. "Thank you for making this work, for not making me choose between loving Mom and loving Kate, for showing me families can grow without erasing who they were before." The words hung in the air after Maya left. Teenage wisdom delivered with the casual profundity that came from being raised by people who didn't hide complexity behind simple lies. "She's extraordinary." Catherine's voice carried wonder and no small amount of awe. "Every day I'm amazed that you let me be part of this, that you trusted me enough to let me into your lives after I lied about everything." "You lied about your name and your job," Marcus corrected gently. "You didn't lie about who you were when nobody was watching. That woman who helped Maya with homework and folded laundry wrong and talked to me about grief like she understood it from the inside. She was real. She's still real, right here making terrible coffee and wearing my t-shirts and building a life that matters more than quarterly earnings ever could." Catherine smiled, but her eyes held the shadow that sometimes crossed her face when she thought about the cost of her choices. "Do you ever regret it? The complexity I brought into your quiet life? The danger I exposed Maya to? The way everything changed because I broke down in your parking lot?" Marcus stood and moved around the table, pulling Catherine to her feet and into his arms with the easy affection of long practice. "I regret that Nathan Cross tried to hurt our daughter. I regret that your mother died trying to do right, and your father spent decades living with guilt instead of taking action. I regret a lot of things about how the world works and how people choose power over principles." He tilted her chin up so their eyes met. "But I don't regret you. Not for a single second. You walked into our lives and reminded me that being alive means more than just surviving, that Maya deserved to see her father take risks on hope instead of just managing fear. You gave us back possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I gave you complications and corporate conspiracies and 3 years of testimony and legal proceedings. You gave us family." Marcus kissed her forehead, gentle and certain. Everything else was just logistics. They stood in the kitchen, holding each other, while morning light painted geometric patterns on the floor, while the coffee got cold and the pancakes congealed, and the world outside continued its complicated spin. These moments, quiet and ordinary and completely extraordinary in their ordinariness, were what Marcus had learned to treasure most. Not the dramatic rescues or the federal investigations or the headlines about reformed corporations, but the simple fact of choosing each other every day, despite easier alternatives. "I should get ready for work," Catherine said eventually, though neither of them moved. "The ethics committee actually listens now, but I still need to show up and push for programs that matter instead of programs that photograph well. And I should review grant applications for the mentorship program." Marcus reluctantly released her. 50 applications for 10 slots. I hate choosing. Hate telling kids they're not selected when they all deserve the chance. "So expand the program." Catherine said it like it was simple, because for her it was. Resources existed to be deployed strategically. Problems existed to be solved through application of wealth and will. The foundation has discretionary funds. Write a proposal for 20 slots instead of 10. Show me the budget, and I'll make it happen. Just like that? Just like that. Money sitting in accounts doesn't help anyone. Money invested in kids who need mentorship and opportunity and someone who believes in them? That changes lives. She kissed him quickly and headed toward the shower. "Write the proposal. I'll push it through the board. This is literally why we have resources, to use them for things that matter." Marcus watched her go, still occasionally startled by the casual way Catherine wielded wealth as a tool for solving problems, rather than a measure of worth or success. She'd kept enough money to live comfortably, to fund the foundation's work, to ensure Maya's education and future were secure. The rest? Billions that had defined her identity for decades, she'd systematically divested and donated, restructuring her life around purpose rather than profit.
The financial press had called it everything from enlightened philanthropy to a mental breakdown. But Catherine had ignored the commentary with the same indifference she'd once reserved for quarterly projections.
What did stock analysts know about the value of breakfast with people who loved you for who you were rather than what you controlled? Marcus spent the morning at the Hayes Community Center, a building Catherine had funded but he'd designed. Every detail focused on actual community need rather than donor recognition.
No marble lobbies or bronze plaques, just clean spaces where kids could do homework without parents shushing them.
Where job training happened in modern classrooms, where health services were provided with dignity instead of charity's condescension. The mentorship program was his particular pride, matching at-risk youth with professionals who understood the potential needed cultivation, not just identification. Marcus had been lucky. Claire had believed in him when he was a kid with more anger than direction, had shown him that intelligence came in many forms and all of them mattered. Now he worked to provide that same belief for kids who needed someone to see them clearly. "Mr. Reed?" A young voice interrupted his grant review, and Marcus looked up to find James Martinez, 16 and brilliant, and struggling with the kind of poverty that made education feel like luxury instead of right. "You got a minute? I need to talk about the engineering scholarship application." "Always got time for you, James.
What's going on?" Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk, noting the tension in the kid's shoulders that spoke of stress beyond typical teenage complications. "My mom's hours got cut at the factory. She's trying to make rent work, but if I'm spending time on scholarship applications instead of getting a job to help out, I feel selfish, like I'm choosing myself over family." The confession came out rushed, embarrassed, and Marcus recognized the guilt intimately, the same weight he'd carried for years. The same impossible math of trying to build a future while addressing immediate crisis. "Let me tell you something about selfishness, James." Marcus leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "When I was your age, my wife, girlfriend then, told me that investing in myself was the best thing I could do for everyone who depended on me. That a high school diploma meant better jobs, better stability, better ability to help when help was needed. I thought she was wrong. Thought she was letting me off the hook for abandoning responsibilities." He paused, memory sharp despite years. Turns out she was right. Education isn't selfish when it builds capacity to do more, help more, be more. You getting that engineering scholarship doesn't hurt your mom. It positions you to help her and your whole family in ways a minimum wage job never could. But rent's due in 2 weeks, and scholarship results don't come out for months. That's not theoretical long-term, that's practical short-term crisis. James's voice carried the forced pragmatism of kids who'd learned too young that optimism was a luxury. "I can get hours at the warehouse, bring in enough to make the gap. I can apply for scholarships next year when things are more stable." Marcus thought about Catherine's casual comment about expanding programs, about resources existing to be deployed. What if there was a third option? What if you could work part-time, enough to help your mom, but not so much it destroys your GPA or scholarship chances? And what if we filled the gap between your earnings and rent through the Emergency Assistance Fund? The Emergency Fund is for families with medical crisis or sudden job loss, not for people who just can't make ends meet. James shook his head. "My situation isn't an emergency. It's just life. We don't qualify for that kind of help." "You're a straight A student with perfect attendance who's been helping care for younger siblings while your mom works 50 hours a week." Marcus's voice firmed. "Your family has been in crisis mode for years. You've just normalized it because there's no other choice." "But there are other choices, James, and one of them is letting people who have resources help people who have need. That's not charity, that's community." He pulled out the emergency fund application form, simplified after Catherine had pointed out that requiring extensive documentation from families already underwater just added insult to injury. "Fill this out. I'll process it today. You'll have a check by Wednesday that bridges the gap between what you can earn part-time and what your mom needs for rent. And you'll have time to complete that scholarship application properly instead of rushing it between warehouse shifts." James stared at the form like it might be a trap, like accepting help was admitting defeat. What if I don't get the scholarship?
What if I take the help and then fail anyway? Then you tried, and life didn't cooperate, which happens to everyone, regardless of resources. Marcus met the kid's eyes squarely. But if you don't try because fear of failure paralyzes you, that's a different kind of tragedy. Your mom is working herself to exhaustion, so you have chances she didn't get. Honor that by using the chances, not by recreating her limitations because guilt says you should suffer alongside her. The words must have hit home, because James took the form with shaking hands, filled it out with careful precision, and left Marcus's office looking like someone had just reminded him that hope was allowed, even in difficult circumstances. Marcus processed the application immediately, authorized the payment, and made a note to follow up with James's college counselor about additional scholarship opportunities. This was what the foundation existed for. Not grand gestures that generated press releases, but steady support that gave people room to breathe, to plan, to reach for possibilities instead of just managing immediate survival. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Board-approved mentorship expansion, 20 slots now, 40 if we get results. You're changing lives, Marcus. I'm proud of you. He smiled at the screen, at the casual way she deployed resources and belief in equal measure, at how she'd learned that wealth mattered most when it disappeared into useful purposes rather than accumulating as proof of worth. The afternoon passed in the rhythm of community work, resolving conflicts over computer lab scheduling, reviewing proposals for nutrition programs, meeting with potential volunteer tutors who wanted to give back but needed guidance on how to help effectively rather than just enthusiastically. Marcus had learned from Catherine that good intentions without strategic implementation often caused more harm than good, that helping required listening to what people actually needed rather than providing what donors wanted to give. By the time he arrived home, evening light was painting long shadows across Millbrook's modest streets. Maya was already there, homework spread across the dining table they'd added during the renovation, soccer bag abandoned by the door in clear violation of household organization rules Catherine had implemented with gentle persistence. "How was the presentation?" Marcus asked, dropping his keys in the bowl by the entrance. Another Catherine innovation, small systems that prevented chaos from accumulating. "Did Mr. Patterson love it as much as we knew he would?" "He cried," Maya said it matter-of-factly, like teachers crying during student presentations was normal. When I explained how sustainable agriculture could address food insecurity in communities like ours, he got all emotional and said it reminded him why he became a teacher. Then he gave me an A+ and asked if I'd present to the school board next month. "That's incredible, sweetheart. Your mom would be so proud, I know," Maya interrupted gently. "You say that a lot, Dad." "And I appreciate it, I really do. But I also know Kate's proud of me, and you're proud of me. And sometimes I wish you'd lead with how you feel instead of always deflecting to how Mom would have felt." The observation hit Marcus with unexpected force, revealing a dynamic he hadn't fully recognized. He'd been so focused on keeping Claire's memory alive, on ensuring Maya knew her mother's values and beliefs, that he'd perhaps been hiding behind that legacy instead of claiming his own emotional presence. "You're right. I am proud of you. So proud sometimes I don't have words for it. Just this feeling in my chest, like my heart's going to burst." Marcus sat beside Maya, shoulder pressing against hers. "You're brilliant and kind and brave. And those things aren't just inheritance from your mom. They're who you've chosen to become. The person you build every day through decisions and actions. I'm proud of that person. Proud of my daughter who cares about food insecurity and helps elderly neighbors and publishes scientific papers at 12. Maya leaned against him, comfortable and loved. "Thanks, Dad." "I needed to hear that from you, not filtered through what Mom might have thought." The front door opened and Catherine entered, arms full of groceries despite Marcus's repeated insistence that delivery services existed for exactly this reason. She'd never fully adjusted to outsourcing tasks she could do herself, retained a stubborn self-sufficiency that sometimes manifested in unnecessary trips to the store. "I got ingredients for that pasta dish Maya likes," Catherine announced, heading toward the kitchen. "And before you say anything, Marcus, I know we could have had it delivered. But I like shopping at the Millbrook Market, like seeing Mrs. Patterson arguing with the butcher about organic certification, like being part of the neighborhood instead of separate from it. I wasn't going to say anything. Marcus stood to help unload groceries. I've learned that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when they're rooted in your need to feel normal instead of separated by wealth. I am normal, Catherine protested, though her smile suggested she knew the argument was complicated. I shop at the same store as everyone else, drive the same roads, deal with the same traffic. The fact that I could write a check for the entire store doesn't make me abnormal, just fortunate. You're both weird, Maya called from the dining table, not looking up from her homework. Normal people don't have philosophical debates about grocery shopping. They just buy food and eat it. The observation was delivered with typical 12-year-old certainty, and both adults laughed at the efficient way she'd diffused their circular argument. Dinner that night was the comfortable chaos of family, pasta sauce simmering, garlic bread baking, conversation flowing between Maya's school politics and Catherine's board meeting absurdities, and Marcus's mentorship program updates. They'd developed rituals over 3 years, small traditions that marked this family as theirs. Maya setting the table with meticulous precision, Catherine always burning the garlic bread slightly because she got distracted by conversation, Marcus insisting on cloth napkins because Claire had believed small elegances mattered even in modest circumstances. After dinner, while Maya finished homework and Catherine reviewed foundation proposals, Marcus found himself in the small garden plot behind their building, the space Catherine had insisted on creating despite his protests about his plant-killing reputation. She'd been patient and persistent, teaching him about soil quality and watering schedules, and which plants could survive benign neglect. The peonies were blooming, white petals unfurling with the determined beauty of flowers that refused to be rushed. Catherine had planted them the first spring after moving in, explained they were her mother's favorite, that growing them felt like keeping a promise across generations. Marcus knelt beside the blooms, pulling weeds with methodical focus, thinking about the strange path that had brought him here. 3 years ago, he'd been alone except for Maya, convinced that the best he could offer was survival and stability. Now he had partnership, possibility, the strange comfort of building something new without destroying what came before. Thought I'd find you here? Catherine's voice came from behind him, soft in the evening air. You always garden when you're processing emotions. It's like meditation, except with dirt under your fingernails. Maya called me out tonight for hiding behind Claire's memory instead of claiming my own feelings. Marcus sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead. She's right, and I didn't realize I was doing it. 12 years old, and she's more emotionally aware than I've been in 3 years of therapy. Catherine settled beside him on the grass, knees drawn up, perfectly comfortable despite designer jeans that probably cost more than his first car. She gets that awareness from you. From watching you navigate grief honestly. From seeing you build a life that honors Claire without being paralyzed by her absence. Kids learn emotional intelligence from modeling, not from lectures. I don't want her to think I'm trying to replace Claire with you, or that loving you means Claire matters less. The confession came out rough, scraping past defenses Marcus hadn't known he was maintaining. How do I show her that both loves are real, both relationships matter, that her mother will always be part of who I am, even as I build new connection with you? You show her by living it. Catherine reached over to cover his dirt-stained hand with her clean one. By talking about Claire naturally instead of carefully, by acknowledging that grief and joy can coexist, by letting her see you cry over old memories and laugh at new ones. She doesn't need you to explain how love works. She needs to watch you prove that hearts expand rather than divide. Marcus turned his hand to interlace their fingers, muddy and clean, pressed together. When did you get so wise about things you've never experienced? You've never lost a spouse, never had to integrate grief into new relationship. I lost my mother at 11. Spent 27 years pretending that wound had healed, when really I'd just built scar tissue so thick nothing could reach the pain underneath. Catherine's voice carried old sorrow, tempered by hard-won perspective. You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that honoring the dead means living fully rather than dying partially out of misguided loyalty. I'm just returning the lesson. They sat in the garden as evening deepened into night, surrounded by flowers that required patience and care, but rewarded both with beauty that justified the effort. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen light clicked on across the way, the elderly woman moving through her evening routine with the steady reliability of someone who'd survived enough disruption to value ordinary rhythms. The memorial dedication is next month, Catherine said eventually. Will you come with me? You and Maya both? I know it's a lot to ask. Spending a day listening to scientists talk about neural interface ethics isn't exactly thrilling entertainment. But I'd like my family there when I talk about my mother publicly for the first time. We'll be there. Marcus squeezed her hand. Maya specifically asked to attend. She wants to understand her grandmother through more than genetics, wants to hear the stories of who Diana Hayes was when she chose principle over career advancement. She would have loved Maya. Catherine's voice held certainty. My mother believed smart girls should be encouraged rather than limited, that intelligence deserved cultivation regardless of gender. She would have spent hours talking to Maya about black holes and electromagnetic fields and all the ways science could help instead of harm. And she would have loved you for becoming the person she hoped you'd be. Marcus turned to face Catherine fully. Not the CEO who inherited an empire, but the woman who walked away from billions to build something that mattered more. The person who understood that her mother's death meant something only if the lesson survived, that some knowledge isn't worth the cost, that ethics matter more than advancement, that being right sometimes means standing alone against pressure to compromise. Tears tracked down Catherine's face, catching the light from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen. I hope so. I hope she'd understand why I couldn't stay in the corporate world, why I needed to find out who I was when nobody was measuring my worth in market capitalization and quarterly growth. She'd understand, and she'd be proud. Marcus pulled Catherine close, let her cry against his shoulder while evening sounds wrapped around them. Distant traffic, neighbors' television, the ordinary symphony of life continuing. Just like I'm proud. Just like Maya's proud. Just like everyone who actually knows you is proud of the courage it takes to walk away from everything you're supposed to want in order to pursue what you actually need. They stayed in the garden until darkness made weeding impossible, and mosquitoes suggested indoor retreat would be wise. Maya was already in her room when they came inside, light showing under her door, accompanied by music that suggested homework had transformed into pre-sleep wind-down. Marcus knocked gently. You good, sweetheart? Need anything before bed? The door opened to reveal Maya in her star-patterned pajamas. The same ones from 3 years ago, worn and faded, but somehow still fitting through the mysterious alchemy of childhood growth that happened in spurts rather than steady progression. I'm good. Just thinking about Grandma Diana. Maya's voice carried the thoughtful quality that meant serious questions were forming. Do you think she'd like me? I know Kate says she would, but that feels like the kind of thing parents say to make kids feel better rather than actual truth. Catherine appeared behind Marcus, leaning against the doorframe with expression gone soft. She would have loved you, Maya. Not because you're my daughter, though that would have mattered, but because you ask the questions she valued. Why does this work this way? What are the consequences of this choice? How do we make sure progress helps instead of harms? Those were the questions that drove her whole career, the framework she used to evaluate everything. Even when asking them got her killed? The question came out smaller, younger, revealing the fear beneath Maya's usual confidence. Even when being right meant being in danger? Especially then. Catherine moved into the room, sat on the edge of Maya's bed with the easy familiarity of 3 years' practice. My mother believed that some principles were worth defending regardless of personal cost, that silence in the face of wrong made you complicit rather than safe. She would have loved that you published an article challenging conventional thinking about family systems, that you're already asking difficult questions instead of accepting easy answers. Maya absorbed this seriously, turning it over with visible concentration. I want to be like her, and like Mom Claire, and like you and Dad. Is that possible, or do I have to choose which values to follow? You take the best from everyone who loves you and build something uniquely yours. Marcus sat on the other side of Maya's bed, creating a circle. Grandma Diana's ethics, Mom Claire's curiosity, Kate's strategic thinking, my stubbornness. Mix them together and you get Maya Reed, scientist and activist and kid who still helps Mrs. Patterson with her computer because being smart means nothing if you're not also kind. Plus my own stuff, Maya added, the parts that aren't from anyone else, the pieces that are just me figuring out who I want to be. Especially those parts.
Catherine agreed. The inherited traits are your foundation, but the structure you build on that foundation is all you. Every choice, every action, every time you decide what kind of person you want to be, that's you authoring your own story instead of just repeating someone else's. They talked for another 20 minutes, conversation ranging from science to ethics to Maya's concerns about middle school social dynamics. By the time Marcus and Catherine finally stood to leave, Maya was yawning, despite obvious attempts to hide it. "Love you both," Maya said as they reached the door, casual and certain. "Thanks for making this family work, even when it's complicated." "Love you too, sweetheart," Marcus and Catherine answered in unison, then shared a smile at the synchronization that came from years of practice. In their own room, the space that had once been Marcus's alone, but now held traces of both their lives in comfortable integration, Catherine began her nightly routine, while Marcus checked email and calendar for tomorrow's obligations. "I've been thinking about the dedication ceremony," Catherine said from the bathroom where she was braiding her hair for sleep. "What I want to say about my mother, how to honor her memory without making it about me or the foundation or anything except who she actually was." "You'll find the right words," Marcus assured her, setting his phone aside. "You always do when it matters." "What if I don't?" Catherine emerged, vulnerability naked on her face. "What if I stand up there and freeze, or say something trite that reduces her to inspirational anecdote, or focus so much on not crying that I forget to actually communicate anything meaningful?" Marcus stood and crossed to her, hands settling on her shoulders with familiar weight. "Then you'll be human in front of people who already know you're human. And that'll be fine. Your mother didn't raise you to be perfect. She raised you to be principled. There's a difference. She didn't raise me at all past age 11. I've spent more years without her than with her, trying to reverse engineer who she was from incomplete memories and secondhand stories." Catherine's voice cracked. "How do I honor someone I barely knew? How do I claim her legacy when so much of who I became happened after she was gone?" "You honor her by living the values she demonstrated even in limited time." Marcus pulled Catherine close, let her rest against his chest where heartbeat provided steady rhythm. "By choosing ethics over expedience. By walking away from power when it required moral compromise. By building a life that helps instead of just accumulates." She gave you foundation in 11 years. You've spent the subsequent decades proving that foundation was enough. They stood holding each other while Millbrook settled into sleep around them, while the life they'd built hummed along on the momentum of daily choices and accumulated trust. 3 years ago, Marcus couldn't have imagined this. Partnership with someone from a completely different world. Family that honored the past while building toward future. The strange comfort of being known completely and loved anyway. "I'm scared," Catherine admitted quietly. "Of the dedication, of public speaking, of reducing my mother to symbol instead of person. But more than that, I'm scared of getting it wrong, of somehow betraying her memory by oversimplifying or sentimentalizing or missing the point she tried to make with her whole life." "Then focus on what you know for certain," Marcus suggested. She valued ethics over advancement. She believed science should serve humanity. She died trying to prevent harm rather than looking away for convenience. Start there, with the demonstrated truths, and let everything else emerge naturally. Catherine nodded against his chest, accepting the framework. Ethics over advancement, service over profit, courage when silence would be safer. Those are the through lines, the themes that matter more than biographical details. Exactly. The dedication isn't really about your mother anyway.
It's about what her example teaches people still making choices about integrity versus expedience, principle versus pragmatism.
Marcus stepped back enough to meet Catherine's eyes. You're not trying to resurrect her or canonize her. You're just telling the truth about what she stood for and why it still matters. That's enough. They finished their evening routine in comfortable silence, small domestic rituals that had become as natural as breathing. Marcus checking door locks while Catherine set the coffee maker for morning, both of them pausing at Maya's room to listen for the steady breathing that confirmed their daughters slept safely. In bed, wrapped around each other in the darkness of their shared room, Catherine spoke one more time. Thank you for helping me think through the dedication, for understanding why it matters so much, for being the partner who doesn't run when things get emotionally complicated. Where would I run to? Marcus asked simply. You're my home, Catherine. You and Maya. This life we've built. Running would mean leaving the only place I've ever truly belonged, and I'm not that kind of fool. You're sure? Because there's still time to escape before you're fully trapped by suburban domesticity and Foundation board meetings. Catherine's teasing carried underneath current of genuine question, old insecurity that sometimes surfaced despite years of reassurance. I've never been more sure of anything. Marcus tightened his arms around her. You showed me that survival isn't the same as living, that taking risks on connection is how you build life worth celebrating instead of just enduring. I'd choose you every single day, Catherine Hayes. I'd choose this complicated, beautiful, sometimes messy life we're building together. She kissed him then, soft and certain, communication that went beyond words into the physical truth of presence and commitment. They learned each other slowly over 3 years, discovered that intimacy built from friendship created foundations stronger than passion alone could sustain. I love you, Catherine whispered against his mouth. I love our life, our daughter, our ridiculous garden that you're actually keeping alive despite your best efforts to kill it. I love waking up next to you and fighting about groceries and watching Maya become herself. I love all of it. I love you too. And I love that Maya calls you Kate instead of some formal stepmother title, that she sees you as bonus family rather than replacement. I love that you kept your name professionally but answer to Kate in our home. I love how you've learned to be human again after decades of being corporate machinery. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found each other through unlikely circumstances and built something sustainable through daily choice. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Foundation meetings, mentorship programs, Maya's presentation to the school board, the looming dedication that weighted Catherine's heart with grief and responsibility in equal measure. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other and their daughter sleeping safely down the hall and a life constructed from intentional decisions rather than default settings. That was enough. That would always be enough. The last thing Marcus thought before sleep claimed him was how proud Claire would be of the family he'd built, of the risks he'd taken on love when safety would have been easier, of the way he'd honored her memory by living fully instead of dying partially out of misguided loyalty. Tomorrow they would face dedication ceremonies and difficult memories and the ongoing work of building family from diverse histories and complicated legacies. But tonight, they rested in the certainty that love multiplied rather than divided, that hearts expanded rather than competed, that three people who'd found each other through chance and choice had created something neither biology nor logic fully explained. In the darkness of their bedroom, Catherine's breathing evened into sleep, while Marcus lay awake a few minutes longer, listening to the quiet sounds of home, the old building settling, Mrs. Patterson's television through thin walls, distant traffic on Millbrook's main street. This was what happiness sounded like when you learned to listen for it. Ordinary moments stretched into string of chosen connection, daily decisions that accumulated into life worth defending. He thought about the dedication next month, about Catherine speaking publicly about her mother for the first time, about Maya listening to stories of the grandmother she'd never meet, but whose values lived on through deliberate transmission. He thought about James Martinez and the scholarship application, about Mrs. Patterson's Tai Chi in her garden, about the community center programs that changed lives through quiet persistence rather than dramatic intervention. Most of all, he thought about the woman sleeping beside him. Brilliant, complicated, occasionally infuriating Catherine Hayes, who'd walked away from billions to discover what actually mattered, who'd chosen them when logic suggested easier alternatives, who'd proven that character counted more than credentials and actions spoke louder than assets. Marcus drifted into sleep smiling, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring its challenges, but they'd face them together. Him, Catherine, Maya, and the extended chosen family of neighbors and colleagues and community members who demonstrated that wealth measured in connection mattered more than wealth measured in dollars. 3 years ago, he'd found a stranger in the rain and made a choice that changed everything. Tonight, he rested in the consequences of that choice, grateful beyond words that he'd offered his jacket to a woman who needed shelter and received in return something he hadn't known he'd lost: the possibility of building new love without betraying old loyalty, of expanding family without erasing foundation, of living fully after learning intimately how fragile and precious life actually was. In the morning, cherry blossoms would still bloom in Millbrook's modest parks. The coffee would still burn slightly because Catherine got distracted by conversation. Maya would still leave her soccer bag by the door in violation of house rules. And Marcus would still wake up grateful for ordinary blessings that felt miraculous when you'd learned not to take them for granted. But for now, in this moment suspended between yesterday's ghosts and tomorrow's promises, 3 people slept safely under one roof: father, daughter, and the woman who'd become family through choice rather than obligation, through daily decisions that accumulated into love as real as any biology could provide. That, Marcus thought as sleep finally claimed him completely, was what his mother would call grace. Not the dramatic kind that inspired songs or stories, but the quiet grace of second chances grasped firmly, of risks taken on hope instead of fear, of families built from intention rather than accident. The kind of grace that turned security guards into community leaders, billionaires into neighbors, and lonely 9-year-old girls into confident 12-year-old scientists who published papers and helped elderly women with computers and understood that love multiplied instead of divided. The kind of grace that transformed rain-soaked parking lot meetings into foundation for building life worth celebrating instead of just surviving. The kind of grace that was, Marcus realized in his final moment of consciousness before sleep erased thought, exactly what Claire had wished for him in those final days when she'd made him promise to live fully after she was gone. He'd kept that promise. They all had. And tomorrow, they'd keep it again.